I'm here with Josh for another episode of Cold Email Breakdown. And for anyone who has never watched this before, this is just a weekly series where Josh and I discuss things related to cold email sales. And before we get into the episode, we can just introduce ourselves for anyone who's never seen this before. My name's George. I'm founder of Email Chaser, which is a cold email sending platform. And Josh, if you don't mind introducing yourself as well, please.
Yeah, I'm Josh Michaels, the founder of Three Red Boxes, a email deliverability and outreach agency.
And later on in this video, we'll share details about how you can contact Josh if you have any questions about cold email. So the first topic I think we should cover today is cold email B2C, because usually when people are discussing cold email, they're typically sending emails to businesses, so business emails like name@company.com. But sometimes people ask questions like, can I send cold emails to a personal email, like at Gmail or at Outlook.com email? And do you have any thoughts on that topic?
I think it's really difficult. I think people treat their work email differently than their personal email. There's a lot of people who just don't really check their personal email as often, versus most people with their work email. They're kind of on top of the emails that are coming in, depending on how busy they are. So there's a better chance of your email being seen. I think as much as we get a lot of emails in our work mailbox, I think I get 10 times the amount of my personal one because of all the other marketing and stuff I've signed up for. I also just think it's different filters. I think it's difficult. I would prefer not to work on those projects. There are some that I have worked on, mostly because to me, even though it was a B2C project, it was reaching out to real estate agents that were not part of agencies. So it was still a business to business style concept. It just went to a free email. So me, it's a little bit different doing that than trying to hit an end consumer, because usually when you're trying to hit an end consumer, it's because you're trying to actually sell something. And again, George, you and I talked about many times, I don't believe outreach is a selling concept strategy. I believe it's to open up a door, to start a conversation, to get things going, to see if someone's interested. I think actually trying to sell something, trying to get people to click a link, go to a website and buy something is almost impossible in this day and age of outreach. And that's, so to me, B2C, when you're talking about like that, I think of end consumer kind of thing, which generally means you're trying to do more of a direct sale, which I just think is asking for trouble. I think your deliverability is almost impossible to keep up. You do have a larger pool, obviously, to email people, but when you have a larger pool, you also can't always target as well. It's harder to get information about an end consumer than it is a company, right? It's probably really hard for me to figure out what George likes and if he would be interested in what I'm trying to sell as an end consumer versus him as a founder of a company and what Email Chaser does. I can look that up. I can figure out if he would be interested in a specific CRM or a specific style of, computers or whatever it is. It's a lot different than what is George himself like when he's not at work.
Yeah, I think you covered something really important there when you said that cold email works when you are trying to simply start a conversation and not just hard sell someone. And I think that's related because, if you're emailing someone and your email is related to business matter, then there is a legitimate conversation to be had there. So, for example, you're emailing a real estate agent, even if they have a personal email address for whatever reason, it's still a business conversation topic. So when you message them, you are starting a relevant conversation. That it makes sense, and they're likely to reply to you. But you just send them some kind of email to some random consumer, at Gmail, but it's not even a real estate agent. It's just a random person. Then
right,
there's no real way to start that conversation in a way that makes any sense. You basically just come off looking like some kind of salesperson or spam, basically, and it doesn't really seem to make any sense.
Yeah, I would agree strongly with that. Like I said, it was a different scenario with this one. I had a prospective client come in, and that was what they pitched. And I think they kind of knew that I generally, because they were referred to me, that I generally don't do B2C, but the way they explained it Because to me, a real estate agent is still B2B. They just happen to not work for an agency and have their own free account, but it's still a work concept.
Yeah. Well, it just sounds like the distinction is it's still B2B, but they just happen to have a personal email.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Versus when you're going to an end consumer, it's you almost have to be selling, right? You're not just trying to start a conversation with George. That's kind of creepy and like you're on a dating app or something.
What's that? How would you start a conversation with a random person? That's the small. What do you? There's no way to know anything about the person. You're just spamming it up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of retargeting stuff that's being done. There's a lot of stuff that where people are putting obviously pixels on websites and tracking you, whether it's from ads or organic or SEO or whatever it is, and tracking where you go. If you go to a store and you put something in a shopping cart and don't complete it, or you do this or you do that, but that's not outreach, right? That's someone who went to your website with some concept of something and you're retargeting and reaching out to them. You know, even if they didn't give you your email address, they still gave you some signal that they wanted to get something from you, from your website. Outreach itself, the concept is that you are acquiring a list, however you get it, and it's completely cold. You have no real information about this person or what they're interested in, and you're guessing, right? I mean, you could sit there and say, well, George is from this city, so maybe he likes this sport team or something, but I mean, you really have no idea.
Yeah, exactly. So, another post I came across recently on a slightly different topic is related to email validation. And this person was looking for a free email validation tool. And when I read that, I thought to myself that this kind of mindset is quite common where people want some free or low cost email validation tool. But I feel like they missed the more important point, which is how accurate it is that tool. Because if a tool is free and it's not going to be the best tool, obviously, and you're probably have a very high bounce rate. So in my opinion, I would never use a free tool because it's not going to be great. Do you have any thoughts on that?
To me, and I know we've talked about this before, I generally say some level of warming is always needed. You and I kind of go back and forth on that, but I think we both agree that hygiene is always needed in every list of every campaign that you run. If it is a new list that you've never run before and you have no engagement stats, no anything, you have to run it through hygiene. The last thing you want to do is get these bounce rates and hurt your domain reputation, your mailbox reputation, everything you just built, everything you paid for, the time, the energy, the money you put into it. Hygiene is not that expensive. I know a lot of people don't want to spend the extra money. And if you're trying, if I do work with some people in the consent opt-in marketing world where they have millions of people on their lists. And they're like, I really don't want to run this through hygiene because now you are talking about a significant chunk of change. But most people in outreach, especially those just starting, your list is 1,000 people, 5,000 people. I mean, you're literally talking about less than $50 at the most expensive, if that, to run 10,000 people. You're going to spend $50 for a good platform. You don't have to get the best of the best. You have to get a good platform that knows what it's doing, can verify it. And at the end of the day, that $50 you spent, and you could probably find one cheaper, is going to stop you from spending hundreds, if not thousands, to try to either rebuild or fix what you just broke. It's just not worth it at the end of the day. If you just add it into the rest of the overhead of what it costs to run cold email, it's just part of the cost. It's just how it is.
Yeah, exactly. Because I just don't think people really realize how problematic hard bounces are. If you get a bunch of hard bounces in your campaigns, it can just kill your email accounts or domains. I mean, that's one of the fastest ways to get blacklisted. So definitely do what you can to use legitimate email verification so you don't have that issue.
And if you want to go with some of the ones that are a little bit cheaper, because there's kind of like 3 levels of them out there. There's like the really cheap ones that are probably going to cost you $15-ish for 10,000. The middle ground, that's like 50. And then the higher ones that are like 100. I generally stick with the middle ground ones unless you really have a reason to go with the high end. But you could test some of those smaller ones. Test it on small lists. I know you don't want to spend that much money, but take a list of 1,000 people, run it through whatever the free one is that you're running, run it through one of the cheaper ones, and then run it through one of the middle ground ones. You're going to spend $15 to compare all three lists, and you're going to see what the difference is. And if the difference between the cheaper one and the middle one is not that different or less than, you have to keep in mind, when we're talking about bounce rates, we're talking about every single percentage point counts. 1 out of 100 counts, right? You bounce 1 out of 100, you'll be okay. You start bouncing 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 100, you're going to run into problems. So if you say, well, my free one, I compared that to the middle ground one, and there was only a difference of 9 emails out of 100, that's probably going to break your system at some point. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it is. So I would say if you want to spend the $15, $20 just to test the different platforms, I am constantly testing hygiene platforms. I'm constantly testing a lot of different platforms to see what the difference is. And I'll run the same list through both and compare the two to see which one I think is better. But I do think that in this day and age, I don't care where you get your list from. And I've had this conversation with hundreds of clients over the years. If you're buying your list from Apollo, ZoomInfo, Seamless, wherever you're getting it from, scraping the internet, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, if you run that through a decent hygiene, you are going to lose at least 10, if not closer to 30% of your list to just bad email addresses. It happens every single time. These are old databases. They don't update their things. People leave jobs constantly. B2B is known for every 90 days, you basically have to rerun your list. If it's B2C, you could probably do it every 6 months, if not at once a year. People don't generally change their personal email address very often. Your work email address changes all of the time. And I have seen, especially from some of these lead acquisition platforms, I've seen 20 to 30% of these emails that are just undeliverable, let alone risky or some other issues with them. And if you run 30% undeliverable through your system, you will no longer have a system to run.
It's kind of a weird thing because, some people say that these lead database platforms like Apollo, for example, are incentivized to give their users more leads because it makes them look better. They can say, hey, look how many leads we gave you with all these emails. But at the same time, if you extend that process further, it then doesn't make any sense because surely those users are going to upload those leads of those emails to their campaigns. They're going to have a super high bounce rate because most of them are not actually valid emails, and then the users will then think that the lead list data from those tools is not very accurate or good. So it's kind of hard to say. I've sort of seen both sides of that, but in general, lower the bounce rate, the better. Just to give anyone watching this an idea of what you should aim for, especially if you're new to cold email, you never launched campaigns. I just launched a campaign recently this week, and so far it's contacted about 1,000 leads, and out of contacting 1,000 leads, they only had 3 bounces. So, and by the way, that doesn't include follow-up emails. That's 1,000 individual leads, and only 3 of them bounced. So that's, effectively 0% bounce rate. What I'm trying to say is that kind of bounce rate, most people don't achieve it. And the reason why they don't achieve it is because they use a cheap or low quality email verification provider. And also they typically don't do double verification. If you use Email Chaser, double verification is built in by default. But what I'm trying to say is if you go the extra mile and you use a great verification service and you also do double verification with 2 different providers, you can get a really low bounce rate.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think it's very vital. I think it's basically part of it. I think once you cross 3%, you're going to start running into problems. I think once you get over 2% and get closer to 3%, you need to start questioning the hygiene software that you're using. You're not going to break a system at 2 or 3%, but I would start to question, why am I getting this high of a percentage when I ran it through some kind of hygiene software? You should be living in, at the most, 1 to 1.5% world. And like George said, the lower, the better. But when I start to cross over 2 to 2.5%, I start to question why whichever hygiene provider I used missed all of these, right? And like you said, Apollo has something called verified emails. That doesn't mean hygiene. ZoomInfo has a score that you can set 85 for 85, 90, 95, 99. Obviously, the higher you set it, the better chance of it passing hygiene. But again, you're going to lose, like George was saying, their job is to sell you as many email addresses as they can. That's how they make money, right? Every email address is another credit. So they're not trying to sell you bad email addresses. It's just the fact that their databases can't be kept up in that large of a database with that many, millions and millions and hundreds of millions of contacts that they have in there. To upkeep that on a regular basis at that fast is pretty much impossible. So even if you set ZoomInfo to 95, it's going to cut down the amount of contacts you get. If you go in there and you look at that quality score, you set it to 85 and you have 10,000 people, and you set it to 90 and you go down to 7,000 people, and you set it to 95 and you go down to 4,000 people. Well, it does seem like you're cutting them. But again, if you export that list of 85 and above and you run it through hygiene, you're going to lose all those people anyways, more than likely, right? You might keep a few, but now you've paid for 5,000 more leads from ZoomInfo, and you've paid to hygiene 5,000 more leads that you didn't need to pay for both. So I generally try to set those settings, especially in ZoomInfo, whichever one it is, as high as I can. Apollo, I'll put no catch-alls, verified only, all that stuff, but does not mean you don't have to run hygiene. You still have to run it. Like I said, if you're running campaigns, you're getting a 3% bounce rate, try a different hygiene provider.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I'll say on this topic of email verification for anyone interested is there is, whatever verification tool you're using, they sometimes use certain phrases and terminology, and it's not really clear what they're talking about. But basically, when you're verifying emails, there's two types of valid emails that they'll give you. The first is regular valid emails, and those are the safest ones to contact because basically you can sort of ping the server of the email account and, basically know at a very high accuracy rate that, okay, that email account is active and that email account is able to receive emails. And, sometimes there's some issues still with that, but in general, it's pretty accurate. But then you have this other set of emails where these tools will call them something like catch-all validated, for example. And those are more risky because if an email account is on a catch-all domain, there's no way of actually knowing through the first method if it's valid or not. You can't really ping the server because by definition it's a catch-all domain. So then what these tools are doing is they're then basically guessing. And the way they have a lot of ways to guess, but they might, for example, try to go to the sign up page of, a certain website and then use that email account. And then if they see that that email account is associated with an existing address on that platform, then they say, okay, well, this email address is already associated with an account here, so it's probably real. So we're just going to say that it's catch-all validated. But the problem with that is that that's not, you can do that all day long, but a very high percentage of those emails are still not going to be active. So your bounce rate will still, could be over 10% sometimes. So what I'm trying to say is if you're going to contact both that regular valid emails and catch-all validated emails, it's usually best to contact the valid emails first and then launch a second campaign afterwards and then contact the catch-all validated emails, and then obviously monitor your bounce rate to make sure that your bounce rate doesn't go crazy, just to keep it all under control.
And as George said, it's kind of tricky with those catch-all domains. If the person who set up the tenant or Google Workspace, the founder, the CEO, whoever it was, and set up the entire domain to be a catch-all, because if somebody misspelled Josh or George or whatever it is, and they don't want that email to get lost, it'll still come in the door. The problem is that it's not going to go to Josh and it's not going to go to George, right? It's going to go to a different catch-all mailbox. So you're not actually getting to the real person. So it is anything, like George was saying, any catch-all domain, everything is considered a valid email because it cannot confirm if it's actually being a real email address and used or not. So I am always very wary of using those. I have clients that swear up and down that there's nothing wrong with them, that we should run them. And I do exactly what George says every single time. I run all of my normal valid emails of one campaign. I take another campaign and I run those. And the second it ticks over 3% bounce rate, I shut it down. If it can stay under a 3% bounce rate, I'll let it run. but I've seen those run at 3%. I've seen those run at 10%. So it's something that I run very, very slowly. If I'm going to do it, I put a lot of throttles on it. So I don't just shoot out 300 emails in a day that are going to bounce at 10% and break everything. But I will drip it out very, very slowly, like 5 or 10 a day max, just to see what happens with these. Because a lot of times some are okay, but more often than not, it's not worth the risk. It's just not worth it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I need to wrap this up because I'm more busy than usual today. So before we go, if someone wants to contact you, so for example, they might have a business, they want to do cold email outbound for their business, but they don't have time to learn all this and implement it themselves. How can they contact you? How can they hire your agency to do this for them?
Yeah, you can go look for us at 3redboxes.com. All of our information about our agencies up there. I do have a LinkedIn page. George will post it at the bottom of this. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have. More than happy to jump on a call, even if you're not sure which way you want to take your project, or if you just have some basic questions about outreach. I think that it changes. Strategies change every single year. So what worked a year or two ago might not work today. And guys like George and I that are constantly in it every single day, we can kind of keep up with what's going on. So if you just want to chat about outreach, if you have some questions about projects or you have some questions about deliverability, maybe you're running it already and you just want advice how to run it better, feel free to go to the website, reach out to me. Happy to jump on a call and go over stuff.
All right, well, thanks for joining me this week. I look forward to our next conversation.
Sure.